Good morning. I'm Flora Keeny. I wish I were here today to tell you about my wonderful life in Irving, because it was wonderful. Unfortunately, I am a sad victim of one of the tragedies of the town of Irving. If you search this cemetery, you'll see several gravestones with the same death date. This date is May 30th, 1879, when a powerful and terrible tornado hit our town. In many ways, Irving would never be the same. The morning started out bright and peaceful, with no indication of the destruction that lay ahead. It was a Friday, and the young ladies of the town were busy preparing for the Strawberry Festival the next day at the Presbyterian Church. Everybody was going about their everyday chores, business as usual. But in the afternoon, clouds appeared in the west and the temperature dropped sharply. Thunder and lightning soon followed. Between 5 and 6 o'clock, the storm broke in a terrible fury. The darkness descended as a funnel cloud bore down on us from the southwest. Anyone who did not take shelter was caught in a maelstrom. Most of us did take shelter in our cellars, but when we emerged to recover and to take stock of the damage, a second tornado struck. This storm was a square front of blackness, nearly a mile wide. The sound was like the bellowing of artillery, causing more death and much more destruction. Those who remained in their cellars fared best. One cellar in town had 23 people in it. Another cellar had the door blocked, so folks had to be rescued by someone digging them out. People came from Blue Rapids and Waterville in wagons and buggies to help. Relief trains were sent from Atchison and St. Joseph. Over 30 houses and stores were destroyed. The Presbyterian Church was blown away, except for the narthex, where, fortunately, most of the girls from the Strawberry Festival had gathered to leave since they couldn't get the door open. The public schoolhouse was razed. Luckily, it was empty, since school had been dismissed in time for the students to get home before the storm. There were 3 girls from the Strawberry Festival who were watching from the bell tower of the church. They watched in horror as the schoolhouse disappeared before their eyes. The storm was so loud, however, that they didn't realize that the same thing was happening to the sanctuary of the very building they were in. That bell tower was so twisted that they were unable to open the doors or the windows. Fortunately, they were saved to tell their story. Some of the stories among the tragedy were kind of comical. Judge Thompson from Blue Rapids was in the area buying eggs, when all of a sudden his buggy top was in the trees and his egg baskets were scattered all across the prairie. He lassoed his team to a tree and started to run toward Mr. Webb's house, when suddenly he realized that Mr. Webb's kitchen was coming toward him. He did escape, praise the Lord. Some of the stories defy the imagination. The whirlwind turned T. Durgan's house halfway around on its foundation, doing no further damage. One new house, which had been completed but was not yet occupied, was blown 200 feet into the air and came crashing down on its gable, crushing it into pieces like an eggshell. One stable, with horses inside, was picked up, carried across the creek, and set down, with no damage to the horses or the stable. Our own 2 horses were killed, but the mules standing right next to them were found quietly contemplating their surroundings. Many of the stories were horror-filled. Mrs. Addie Williams was found holding her crying but uninjured baby, while she herself had been killed from a beam falling from the house. There were others who had taken shelter in that same house, but she was the only one injured. The force of the storm blew Fanny, the bohemian servant girl at the Sheldons, into a post, killing her. Miss Emma Sheldon was crushed in a frightful manner. Her clothes were stripped off, and her body was covered with bruises and marks from the debris. All in all, 11 people died, with one dying several days later. Another 50 people were injured. Hit especially hard was the Buckmaster family, with five of its 8 members being killed. Mrs. Susan Buckmaster and her 4 young girls, ages 2 through 9, were laid out side by side among the dead. My husband and I were also among the casualties. I was blown a quarter mile from our house and thrown to the earth with such force that they found me buried to my shoulders in the mud. My husband John and his father Clinton, who was visiting us at the time, were found dead near the spot where our house had stood. Our 2 sons were injured. One had his leg broken in several places and cried for me in his pain. The Methodist Church was used as a hospital. The billiard saloon was the morgue, with bodies laid out on the pool tables. Throughout the gloomy night, men searched through the rubbles of the ruined buildings, seeking the wounded and the dead. It was a sad, sad night in Irving. There was no strawberry festival the next day. Instead, the town was picking up the pieces and mourning the lost. The bridge over the Big Blue River had been blown completely away. In fact, one eyewitness said that the river bed was blown completely dry just as the bridge disappeared. This left no access to Greenwood Cemetery, which was then on the east side of the river. So on Sunday morning, 10 of us were buried in the newly created cemetery east of town. This cemetery became known as Sylvan Shade Cemetery. It was said by the relief crew from Atchison that this was the worst storm in Kansas history to that date. For over 100 years, Irving had the distinction of being the only town with 2 tornadoes in one day. Irving gained national attention as the storm was covered in newspapers across the country. This media recognition gave the Kansas the title of the Cyclone State. Local legend has it that Frank L. Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz, used many of the tales from our town's storm in his famous book. Well, Irving did rebuild. That's what good Kansans do. They take what Mother Nature does to them and they find a way to survive. But it wasn't easy, and it took some time. In the meanwhile, several spirits roam this cemetery, all of us with the same date on our stones, May 30th, 1879.